Mr. Chairman, members of council, this is a result of having a little more well work needed this year than we anticipated. We currently have 2 wells at Miller Park that are needing cleaned and probably new pumps. So this appropriation will allow us to do the worst case scenario in addition to the other wells that we've done between the north and the south plants this year. So if possible, I'd like suspension so that we can keep this moving. If not, we can wait 2 weeks. It's whatever the preference of council is.
This is one of those that it's important that we get it underway and get everything, POs out and everything, so we will be asking for suspension, and Mr. McDaniels will be seconding.
Are there any questions on 12519? Seeing none, we will ask for suspension. Thank you, sir. Next item I have is 12617. That's a resolution to appropriate from the general fund 101.
How about 19?
I'm sorry?
You said 12617.
Well, I meant 19. Everybody knew what I meant. A resolution to appropriate from the general fund. Where is Clerk Valita? There she is. Come on up. Valita has a insurance appropriation problem, so share with us what we got going on.
I do. What happened was in February of this year, it was actually my husband's insurance that we were on, and I don't know how many of you know, but the Kroger facility in Columbus shut down, and we were covered on his insurance through the end of April, and so at the beginning of May, I was picking up our insurance. At the same time, I had a full-time employee who had walked out in April, leaving employment. She was full-time. She had family coverage. In my mind, I was thinking, well, there's the switch because hers ends the last day of April, mine picks up the first day of May. Not taking into consideration the person who filled the full-time position also picked up family health coverage. Brittany Coakley was hired in April and also picked up coverage. So it's left me short from May through the end of this year, one family coverage for those months. So that's what the figures are to cover the balance so that I don't go into.
Making Trish mad?
Yeah, well, I would get a call, I'm sure. So,
Well, okay. Well, very good. We appreciate you coming down. Any questions for the clerk? Well, very good. This is, so it's 14,000 will get us to the end of the year for both employees?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Anyone have any issue with suspension so we don't go into the red and make Trish mad? Very good. Seeing none, Mr. McDaniel, will you second this, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You do not need to stick around if you don't want to.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Just a quick thought, and this might not be possible because of the way we budget, but it seems to me that there are probably there's a lot of variation across all city departments in terms of employee movement, and I'm wondering if it would be possible for us to budget for insurance across all of city government so that we wouldn't put individual department heads in a position where they had to make requests like that around this type of issue.
That's a great thought, and many people used to do that when we were flush with cash. That's what many of the enterprise funds did as an example, because they have large carryover, so they can appropriate that high. We can never do this as a general fund department, so we basically manage that down to really the last dollar, but you're on the right track. Yeah, I like the way you think. But it's truly a money thing, because at the end of the day, they're trying to get the carryover to be the right number for bond covenants and those types of things. But you're not wrong.
Got it.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good
That's
thought.
helpful.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. So, Mr. McDaniel, I'm going to ask you to suspend on that with me on 12619.
Yes.
Next item I have is 12719. This is a resolution to appropriate from the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund 834 and transfer to the Cemetery Fund 207. This is coming through Public Works. Mr. Schoonover.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Hintz, if you want to come forward, this is for some funds for the Memorial Garden at Forest Rose.
Good evening. This 35,000 will allow us to finish our memorial garden, columbariums. It's going to allow us to add 2 more columbariums with landscaping and all the concrete work and everything that's already out there. That will, I'm going to do this through the budget, but we've already brought this through the investment committee. They approved. There is, we just had to bring legislation forward to allow us to appropriate out of 834. But this will all show up in my budget for the cemetery when you guys get your when you get the new budget package.
That doesn't make any sense to me. Help me understand. I know we're appropriating out of the perpetual fund, which we've done before, to do upgrades, as I recall.
Right.
Actually, it was the first time we went in there I think ever, might have been. I think Law Director Vandervoort might have been still here at the time. So when you say it'll be in your budget, what does that mean?
Well, the money, we'd had to have the legislation to bring it out and put it into the 207.
Yep.
Okay, and then it'll just be reappropriated for next year's use. Okay, I'm not going to use it this year.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to put it up. It'll get dumped into the 207, and then.
And you will ask for it to be appropriated as part of the 2020 budget.
2020 budget, yes.
So it'll, in theory, it'll carry over and drop to the carryover,
Right.
in which in your 207 budget for next year then will be appropriated as part of your budget.
Yes.
Now that makes sense.
Okay, sorry about that.
Questions for Mr. Hintz? So 3 readings, I assume, is fine?
Yes, 3 readings is fine. Go ahead.
Okay, and then explain a little bit about the perpetual care and why the city investment committee has to be a part of that, because of that money is kind of very
The
restricted.
ORC, and I don't know what number it is, but the ORC states that we have to set aside so much money, and I think we set aside 20% of every grave that we sell. It goes in a perpetual care trust fund. It can be used for capital expenses. What happened when you were talking about Terry Vandervoort first going after this, and I think that was in 2012, before that you had to go through probate to allow for that to be done. However, she wrote it up, which allowed that burden to be put onto the city's investment committee. And then it's just a matter of, this is the capital project that we want to do, or that we need to do, however we want to look at it. And then I take it to the investment committee, and they go forward, whether yay or nay.
Well, that's good. I mean, my whole point here is to make sure we have oversight over this money, so we can't just arbitrarily pick it up and
No,
do it.
and that was part of her, that's part of the way she wrote it up. It had to go through the investment committee and then come to this body for approval.
And remind me who the investment committee is? I know it's the mayor,
It's the mayor.
auditor.
Law director and the auditor.
Okay, there we go.
So,
All right, questions for Greg on that? Just want to give you a little clarity on that. Who's your second, Mr. Schoonover?
I'll be Mrs. Bobbitt.
Mrs. Bobbitt, in 3 readings, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next item I have on tonight's agenda is Resolution 13019. That's a resolution to appropriate from the wastewater replacement Fund 625 and the Water Utility Reserve Fund 627, dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract and authorize the issuance of a then and now certificate. That is a lot. That's coming through water pollution. Mr. Woodard.
Yes, and I'd like Mr. Nixon again to come up.
I hope I just heard the words and they weren't in there. This is all water, not wastewater, right? Did I
Right.
hear?
Did I say wastewater?
I don't know if
Yes.
you did or not, but I
You said
thought I.
volunteer.
He did.
Reserve.
Okay.
I did, if I said it, but it's not written that way, so
Okay.
I'm having a rough night.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure it's right and we don't have to make an amendment before we move
I
forward.
think it's on me, not you.
Okay. This is coming up pretty quickly, and I want to stress my chairman out again and ask for a potential suspension, and I'll leave it up to him whether or not he wants to. We are in the process of trying to get a second membrane loaded at the South Water Treatment Plant. And in doing that, that requires more flow through the water transmission main from the well field. When we've been trying to do that, we've been stirring up a lot of sediments and deposits in the 3,800, 4,000 feet of pipeline that ranges from 20 to 24-inch, I believe, lines out in the well field, and a couple 12s. We tried flushing the lines. We actually had our staff come down, excuse me, and install a new hydrant on that line closer to the plant, see if we could flush there. But trying to flush out of a 6 or an 8-inch line from a 24, not real good results. So we've been searching for solutions. We looked into a technology called ice pigging, and that is where instead of traditional pigging where you launch a mechanical device in a pipeline and it scours the line, this particular line doesn't have a launching station or a receiving pit. So there's been some technology that's come out of Europe that they will actually pump a slurry of ice through that line, and it'll come out like a rusty slushy out the fire hydrants at the end of the pipeline. This is pretty expensive, so I'll talk a little bit later about some legislation that I'll be bringing forward in the next couple weeks to look at a permanent fix for this. But this has just been since 2004 till now, not getting enough velocity through the line, dropping out those solids. So this will hopefully allow us to get the flows we need in for the second membrane. Right now, when we turn it on, we're fouling cartridge filters. Each one of those cartridge filters costs about $2,400 to load. With new cartridges, we 2 times tried it, and within minutes fouled those cartridge filters and have had to take them out of service and reload new cartridges. So we're looking at a long-term solution to fix this. The reason I've asked for dispensing with competitive bidding, Suez Utility Services are the owners of the patent of this technology. They are the only ones in the United States that do ice pigging. So there would be no point in bidding because nobody would be able to bid against them right now. So, and the reason I'd like to potentially get it suspended is since they are the only game in town, getting on their schedule is difficult, and they will not put us on the schedule until they have a purchase order. So trying to get this done. Hopefully by the end of the year. They seemed like maybe that could happen if we got them a purchase order. The longer we wait, the more jobs they'll certainly fill into their calendars. So this is, again, something that we're pretty comfortable with. A lot of communities use ice pigging on their water mains throughout their cities. It's proven to be a very viable technology. So talking to the plant manager, and both plant manager and myself, we feel comfortable that this will help us remove those sediments and solids and allow us to start getting more water into the plant.
Excellent.
And I think, as you all realize, we're finding out in a lot of areas of water, streets, and our sewer systems that right now is not a good time to try to get people under contract because there's so much work out there, so it's important that we get right in as quick as possible. So we will ask for suspension, and Mr. Hall will be seconding it.
Any questions for Mr. Nixon on this? Any issues with suspension? I don't see any. Ice pigging, I gotta see what their tagline is, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a neat, that sounds neat anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty cool technology, and a guy in Britain came up with it in an industrial application. They're having trouble with the water line in an industrial, and I don't know, sitting around drinking beer one night or what, but he said, let's try this, and it worked, and they kept doing a little larger scale and a little larger scale, and now they have these machines that they can calculate how much their chiller is going to have to add and how many gallons they're going to have to add for the slushy to come out of the pipe. So it's pretty neat stuff. So if you get online and Google ice pigging of water mains, there's quite a bit of stuff out there.
And you're right, Mr. Stoughton, it is a very cool process.
It's a cold process.
Wow, we are on fire tonight. Thank you.
Yes.
Please leave the podium. All right. Next item I have is temporary ordinance 1719. That's an ordinance to amend the 2019 management pay ordinance. I'm going to defer to Mayor Scheffler. Mayor Scheffler.
Yes, as you all may be aware that Mary Jo Smith is going to retire early next year, and we need to have a replacement hired to learn her position before she departs. And this is this change in the pay ordinance is allowing for that second person to be paid temporarily while both of them will be on duty.
And I suspect this is because there's specific workings of the program that.
Yes,
this
it's
is
a very
federal program, right?
complicated position with lots to learn with the federal system and all the regulations that go along with it.
Yeah, okay, questions for the mayor? Timing? 2?
I think 3 readings is fine.
All 3's fine?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we will ask for 3 readings, and since Holly's not here, she can still be the second because we go 3 full readings. So we'll go 3 readings on 1719. Are there any departmental updates this evening?
He didn't stay away.
I love the FaceTime.
He'll show me.
Yeah, I can beat you. didn't I? Sorry to follow me. I wanted to let council know, as a result of getting the south plant up and running, we've been trying to run more water through the the main water line from the wells in the plant, and then from the concentrate line from the plant to Canal Street, which the concentrate is reject water from the membranes that gets pumped back to the city, dumped into a sewer at Canal Street, and then is treated at the Lawrence Street wastewater treatment plant. Well, again, over years, there's been sediments that have been accumulating in that line. It really wasn't planned to take care of that problem. So what I've been working with Arcadis, our engineering consultant that we have a lot of confidence in, asking them to provide me a scope and a cost so we can look at a permanent solution to flushing the raw water line. And we would like to do that in the future. Every time that we have a minor shutdown, we can flush that line to our lagoon before we run it into the plant. So it'll constantly be a clean line, and we won't be ever accumulating solids and needing to have a $100,000 pigging job done in the future. The second thing we need to look at is the 4-mile transmission line for the concentrate, trying to figure out what's going to be the best way to clean that, improve the potential flow through that line. There are no real provisions to do that right now. So again, we want to try to come up with something long-term that as the city continues to operate this plant, this isn't an every 10, 12-year problem, that we find out a long-term solution to the problem. So I will hopefully be coming in the next week or two with some legislation, and again, it'll be for engineering services to study both the raw water line and the concentrate line coming out of the plant. So I don't have any clue what that's going to cost yet, and until we get the scope ironed down, we won't really have a cost.
All right, questions for Mr. Nixon? Very good. We'll look forward to seeing that legislation. Thank you. Ms. Woody.
Good evening. A couple updates from transit. I wanted to again publicly thank the X-Church. I know I had told you a couple meetings ago that Steve Rao and the X-Church was donating money to pay for fares on the loop buses again during the fair week to make certain that anybody that wanted to go to the fair could get to the fair. So we had a lot of extra ridership during fair week, and X-Church paid for all of those fares. So again, if you see Steve Rao or anyone from the X-Church, please say thank you, because that has been such a blessing to us this year. In other news, since our last city council meeting, we did, after working with Ride Right, the third-party contractor, and asking for a best and final offer, unfortunately, their cost only came down 23 cents per hour, which would have only decreased the total cost of their entire contract by $8,000. So we did have to send them a letter per our contract by September 30th to notify them that we would not be continuing our contract with Ride Right. So we have been working with city administration and the Ohio Transit Risk Pool on a transition plan to bring all of those staff members under the city of Lancaster. The Ohio Transit Risk Pool was at my office today, starting a transition plan with us to look at all of our safety, what we need to do to improve our safety, our customer service, our vehicle maintenance. and then working through that plan from here until December 31st. Ride Right sent a corporate representative to our office last week to talk about transition, basically said, that they are willing to help us through the transition, whatever we need in the process as well, and they will work with us hand in hand through that process. I'm going to be meeting with Gretchen Nyheiser later this week so that we can start discussing pay ordinances and pay scales. It is our intent at this point to have a separate pay ordinance for the transit department and those transit employees. So as we get through that process, I will try and keep you updated. I know that's a very big overview. There's a lot that we are working through and trying to finalize. The process and the revenue streams will remain the same. We've worked through this budget. I've had the Ohio Transit Risk Pool look at it from their side, looking at deductibles and liability insurance and what I needed to budget for. I've asked different departments throughout the city to kind of help me with it, looking at what to look at in pay scales, what to look at in overtime, and from that point of view. So I feel very confident in the budget that we released to you probably about a month and a half ago, I think it was, that budget that was sent to you when we first applied for the Ohio Transit Risk Pool. We're very confident in those numbers right now. I am open to any questions, concerns. If you've had a chance to review that budget, I'm open to comments on that. If you haven't had a chance to review and you would like to review it with me, I'm more than happy to meet with you one-on-one so that we can go over those budget numbers as well.
Questions? Mr. Woodyard?
Does this mean we're now opening a new department in the city?
It's already been a department. So we've already had 3 city employees in the department. It's just the drivers and the operations manager have been Ride Right employees. But the mechanic, the accounts payable, receivable, and myself have always been, we've always been city employees, so we've already been a department.
And currently, you are funded basically on grants and very little city money income, right?
So we've always been operated on very little city money. Thank you for putting it that way, so I didn't have to, but yes. So we get $73,000 from the general fund. Since I've been with the city of Lancaster in 2009, it's always been $73,000. That's what I budgeted moving forward into 2020 is for $73,000 from the city general fund. And then what we do is we get local match money. So local match money can come from advertising. It can come from local contracts that we do with local agencies or school districts to provide transportation. When we sell, like our old vehicles in city auction, that becomes local match money. So we use all of the local match money to apply for, it's matched with state and federal grant dollars to provide the total cost of our operations and then all of our capital projects. Some other local match money that we have, the county commissioners give us money, Meals on Wheels older adult levy gives us money, different townships and villages throughout the county give us money, City of Pickerington. So we get a lot of little money from different agencies throughout the entire county.
And currently, all of your employees are non-union?
That is correct currently.
And if they would switch to union, then we would be forced to move to city salary schedules that our other union employees have?
That could be a possibility.
Further questions? Mrs. Bobbitt?
Excuse me. You said Ride Right was it on Friday? Or
They were in Thursday of last
Thursday?
week.
Did they give you any indication why they raised their rates by $400,000?
They did not. They've actually raised their rates the last 2 years for us. So, I mean, they've raised their rates every year, but usually it's within a 3 to 5% increase. And the last 2 years have been much more than that, rather than just those small incremental increases. They did not indicate why. When they submitted their bid proposal, they don't break that out.
Okay, well, I know in the meeting that we had where the Ride Right representative was there, I personally asked her to go back to, since she couldn't answer any question that I had, I personally asked her to go back and get the answer to that, and I've not heard back from her either. So I just wondered if you had.
Nope, the only thing that I received back was a best and final offer that was 23 cents an hour cheaper than their original offer. There was no explanation. It's just, that was their best and final offer. And when the corporate when the individual from corporate came last week, he basically just said, thanks for being a partner the last several years. We're here to help throughout the transition. He went through the office to say, you know, anything that was his that he wanted back, or if it was theirs and they didn't want it back, he kind of made a list of what, just moving forward, and to reach out to him with any questions or anything that we need through the transition.
Okay. Another question, Tom. And once again, when you went out for bid, you sent that out to how many companies?
Oh, I would have to get back with you. We sent it to
Well-
over 30.
And you received no bids back from any other company?
Correct. We just received one bid back from Right.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mrs. Teener?
I did want to let everybody know, this is not something that the city council voted on and approved. This is something, I guess, that the mayor decided to do. I guess that's who made the decision. This was not a city council vote. It was brought up to me that it was. I did not vote on any of it because I don't think all of us on city council actually want to do this. But I will say, you have a mechanic. I have this breakdown here, and you're going to hire another mechanic?
That is correct. Even if we were going to continue contracting, we were already going to hire a second mechanic. We have 25 to 30 vehicles for one mechanic, and it's a safety issue.
But do they work on them, or do you send them out, outsource them to other, like, shops and that to fix it, or other departments to fix it? They don't fix everything.
They fix as much as they can, but right now, our fleet is too large for one mechanic, so we have to send it out. But it's really hard to do that because then our vehicles are out of service for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, and it hurts our service.
And with, grants are not, you know, guaranteed. So what happens if the grants go away and they're union or whatever? What happens in that meantime?
If the grants go away, I no longer have a job, and neither do any of them.
Well, who pays them unemployment, or, I mean,
Under the city, it would be the city paying unemployment. And I know Mr. Stoughton had a very similar question. Mrs. Bobbitt had the same question. So I did get with our HR director because I don't personally understand all of the HR formulas involved. It gets very sticky when you're looking at it. And Mr. Stoughton had asked that maybe we look at, you know, if we lost half of our grants and had to lose half of our service, what would that look like? What's our risk for the city? The best that we can come up with, using all the formulas and the what-ifs, because workers' comp is very convoluted, it would be just under $100,000.
You meant to say unemployment. It's very-
Unemployment, sorry, unemployment, thank you. Would be our liability.
Further questions? I have a couple. So, one of the things I asked you earlier is, and Mel kind of asked you kind of something similar, you know, why did Ride Right's prices go up? But it seems their model is changing to focus on different types of services versus actually, you know, municipal public transit. Can you speak to that for the group here?
So I can't say exactly what their goals are. I can tell you they do several other models of transportation. We were their very first public transit agency. Before us, they had never even tried the public transit realm. Their bread and butter and what they started as their company was called it's called MTM, Medical Transportation Management Company. And that was the parent company. So that was their first service, was doing medical transportation only. They tried doing public transit with us. We were their first system. After we awarded them a contract, they did pursue some other public transit agencies. I don't know currently how many they have. I don't believe it's a lot. What they've really moved toward in their business model is becoming more of a broker for public transportation and for medical transportation. So for example, in the state of Florida, their Medicaid and Medicare hire what's considered a broker to send out trips, all of the medical transportation under Medicaid and Medicare. So Ride Right just collects an administrative fee to broker out those trips to other small mom and pop transportation agencies, and they don't physically provide the transportation themselves. So I know they do that in several states, and again, they do that one-on-one medical transportation.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to share. They've kind of changed their model. Second to that, you and I have had the discussion, the same as, no different as other questions that Mr. Woodard and Mrs. Teener and Mrs. Bobbitt have had. That certainly when your funding, if your funding happens to get cut, then you'll have corresponding cuts of personnel and other things appropriately. And as none of us, I think, are fans of creating another internal city department, but in this case, you know, the service that public transportation provides, in this case, requires us from a cost-effective perspective to do it now. And but again, I think you're clear, the administration is clear, that should we lose, you know, revenue, then we know that we're, it's not going to be propped up by the general fund because we don't have the money to do that. Mr. Hall.
Tom, I know that we've heard in the past what the cost savings are, but it would help, it might help just to kind of put this in perspective, what the difference between the city believes it can provide that service and the final bid that we got from Ride Right. And if there's, and this might not be possible, but if we could put, if it's possible to put aside some of those monies into a risk fund to cover some of the potential liability in the event that we do lose revenues, that is one way to maybe mitigate some of the concerns of council.
No, that's a good point. And I think, I know transit coordinator or manager Woody has that information, the cost, the Ride Right cost and our cost, which is significantly less, $250,000 less maybe.
It is about $250,000 less.
So, but you bring up a good point. If we can set aside some contingent monies in the event that, and again, we don't need to get it all up front at one time, but we create a fund to do that. That's a really good idea. So, what I might add is, do you have that information, the Ride Right compare to your cost compare on your webpage? On your
It's
city
not
webpage?
on our webpage, but I could easily upload
Yeah, I
it.
think we should. I mean, I think it's a good thing to do because
It's attached to not this previous Public Works meeting minutes
Okay.
on the website, but one of the previous three that we've had discussing this. There is the proposed budget and then the comparison of the two. So it's already attached. Clerk Sandy had put that on after our last Public Works meeting minutes were submitted.
okay.
So it's on there for everybody to take a look at, for sure.
Mayor Scheffler?
We probably should add that by bringing it in-house, we can give the bus drivers an increase from their current $9.50 per hour base wage and still save $249,000 a year.
Mr. Groff?
Yeah, just so I understand something here. You say save $249,000. On the other hand, it's not the city's money that's being spent, it's the grant money that's being spent. And when I hear Mr. Stoughton say something about being able to set aside a contingency, since it's funded by grants, then that contingency, I assume you're saying, would be coming out of grant money. And can you do that when it's not actual expenses, that the grant, is it not for actual expenses, that if you're not spending all of it, you can't just put it into a contingency, but would go back to, or you may get less the next time?
Well, if you want to talk about mechanics of money, you could use the city portion of the money to set that aside as opposed to the grant portion of the money. So I think there's mechanics involved. I think it can happen. Again, I'm not the auditor, I'm not a lawyer, but I think Mr. Hall brought up a fantastic point, and I think it's a good idea that we consider doing that to be able to, and I'm not suggesting that if the number's $100,000, we immediately take $100,000 and throw it in there. I mean, there's no indication on the horizon that public transit funding is going away at the state or federal level. Now, if that were the case, then we'd be having maybe a little different discussion. But I think that, if you parse away, $10,000 or $50,000, whatever it is, or set that even aside, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because, I mean, you still have a carryover, right? Because you can't possibly spend your budget down to zero and then start next January with no money in the bank. So it's really no different than any other type of enterprise department.
Well, and Mr. Stoughton, if I can just kind of clarify too to Mr. Groff, the $249,000, so our state and federal grants are eligible for 50% of our operating cost. So that $249,000, we would have to come up with 50% of that locally so we would be paying half of that locally.
That confused, that offers
So
no
the
clarity
difference of
whatsoever.
$250,000, we're eligible for up to 50% in state and federal grants. So if we added $250,000 to our budget, we would be responsible
I see.
for 50% of that $250,000.
Now that makes sense. Gotcha.
If we
So-
took the ride right contract.
Correct.
Correct.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's,
Sorry.
got it. Further questions? Mrs. Teeter?
I did want to ask, so Pickerington, we go to Pickerington, how many times a day? How many buses go?
It varies day to
Do
day.
we take people to Pickerington and?
We take people to
and how
Pickerington
much
and we
does that
bring
cost
people
for
from
them to
Pickerington to
ride?
Lancaster.
How much does that cost to ride to Pickerington?
So if they call in advance, general public, and our fare's the same anywhere in the county. It is $2 one way for general public, $1 for elderly disabled. And the way that the federal grants are structured, this is FTA, okay? This is just how the FTA is structured public transit. It is meant to be a subsidized program. So the more you collect in fares actually counts against you when you are trying to get your matching grants.
Okay, so when kids are being bused to Head Start, like the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds that the transit bus takes, how much do those parents pay, or does the school pay to have
The
them
school
trained?
district pays. And if we are contracting with school districts to count that as local match money, we actually have to charge those school districts the fully allocated cost of what it costs us to run that trip. So most of those contracts are paying about $15 a ride because that's our actual cost. We do not get federal reimbursement for those contracted trips.
Further questions? Mrs. Bobbitt?
When you, when you were looking at other cities, how might they have solved this problem? Do you have a percentage? And I'm not, I'm not sticking you to this percentage. What do you think the percentage of city-run transportation departments there are? Transit,
So
sorry.
I don't have that answer in front of me. I do have that back at the office, but I can tell you that the city of Lancaster was one of 5 transit agencies in the state of Ohio that was still contracting out with a third party. Everyone else was operating under a city or county employees. We were one of 5 that was left.
Okay,
For the majority of the transit agencies, they've all taken operations in-house.
okay. That's the answer I needed. Thank you.
I do have exact numbers for you. I just don't have that with me, sorry.
Further questions? Mr. Rule, President Rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been operating under this particular revenue stream model for a number of years, right?
Since the existence.
And we have no sense that it's going to change. There's nothing that you've seen, heard, et cetera, that the FTA is going to make changes to the model from a revenue standpoint.
That's correct. The FTA has not indicated any changes whatsoever, and the state actually increased their transit funding this biennium.
And so with a sound revenue model and saving $250, we're going to be able to provide the same or better service to our customers, right? We're going to be able to expand what we're doing as we save these dollars?
So that is the hope. I have budgeted a lot extra in salaries. However, with it being our first year of operation, I would rather wait until later in the year to actually expand to make certain that all of my budget figures and my forecasting is appropriate before I add service and then have to take it away.
So, but we're going to offer at least the same service that we've been offering.
Correct.
And we're going to pay drivers more.
Correct.
And it's going to cost us less.
Correct.
Very good summary. Further questions? Very good. Anything else?
I have nothing else.
Further
Comprehensive.
departmental updates. Service Safety Director Martin.
So later, the mayor and President Uhl and I have been talking. We have Lindy Jackson will be here speaking during council, I think during special presentations. But I want to let you know why he's here. It's in regards to the Hunters Run Conservatory District. I'll be introducing a resolution next city council, and it'll make more sense if we can have this information given to us tonight. It is to protect the west side of town from floodings, which has been going on since 1948, even though big rains in our area can still cause other flooding. But he'll look a little bit more into that. So I just want to let you know he'll be speaking about that. He is currently on the board. He's a city resident, volunteered to be a volunteer member of the 3-member board of this district. And
Used to have your job.
Yes, he used to be right here years ago. But
No, he has his job.
Further updates. Thank you, sir. Seeing none, we will move on to President Newell for tonight's meeting prep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have several temporary ordinances and resolutions to work through, beginning with temporary resolution 12819, a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a pre-annexation agreement. This coming through law. Mr. Groff.
This is the annexation of the property formerly known as Timber Top. Before anything actually passes council, it will also have to go to the planning commission and will require a public hearing. We're going to introduce it now, but at some point in the future on the readings, we may have to table this while it does go to the planning commission. Past that, I think only a portion of that is determined as to what it's going to be at this time, or where it's going to occupy that property, which would be a senior living development. The rest of that is kind of up in the air and not set yet. So unless Law Director Ullum has something to add at this point, I'll just say 3 readings.
Thank you, Mr. Groff. Mr. Ullum, anything to add?
Yeah, just I wanted to add that we're still, there's a couple small things, I guess, that we're waiting to finalize on the pre-annexation agreement. So the one that's attached as an exhibit is the city's latest version, if you will, a clean copy of the city's latest version. I do not believe that it'll change much from what you're seeing, but I wanted to make you aware that we are still, if you will, negotiating the final parts of that. The other thing, just to add to Councilman Groff or whatever, they will, this process will run. The petitioners have filed for annexation with the county commissioners. There's a hearing set on November 19th, I think it is, with the county commissioners with regard to this annexation. We have to wait for that process, of course, to happen for the commissioners to actually approve the annexation and then send it our way. So these 2 resolutions and then, of course, the 2 ordinances and everything, will need to be tabled, waiting for that to come to us. So, and then, of course, Planning Commission will be running a dual path. I know they've submitted their zoning request, and it's going to Planning Commission meeting next month.
Yes.
To start that process. So,
Thank you, Law Director Ullum. Any questions? Mr. Woodger.
Is this group requesting any type of tax rebates or anything?
There's been some discussion about that. Very early stage right now, we need to kind of know, as you know, any type of tax increment financing, any TIF, is going to be based on kind of, numbers and dollars and what kind of jobs get created and things like that. So it's something that we are discussing, but I don't know that, it could work, maybe it won't work, we just don't know at this stage.
It would be unusual for a TIF of this type, wouldn't it, normally? We don't go this route?
It depends. The senior living facility, of course, will create jobs. There's also some discussion of another developer coming in and putting in a skilled nursing facility, which will create jobs. The rest of the development is, as I understand it right now, is intended for single family residential and maybe some multifamily residential. Yeah, as a rule, if it's residential, no, we don't, because the job creation is really what the setoff is to do some sort of TIF. So residential ones don't usually, but so that's why it's also dependent on to see what they actually end up building that's going to maybe create and bring jobs.
Because the majority of the land is right now being looked at as residential, correct?
I don't know the majority based on the layout. I want to say that the senior care living facility and the villas that go, with that will be in the upper portion. I know that the skilled nursing care facility, if that happens, will be in, the front portion of that property, with the back being reserved for the residential. So I'm not exactly sure what the split out of that is. Maybe I know Engineer Nolan might know that a little better than I do, but I want to say pretty even split. I want to say there's about 40 acres, Mitch. Sorry to drag you into it, but I actually don't know that.
Engineer Nolan.
Yeah, so we did receive all of the information for the zoning portion of that, which will be held at Planning Commission coming November 14th. Actually, today it was posted to the city's website. If you go to the engineering department homepage, there's a little link that you can click right to. So it has all of the attachments, all of the mapping, all the things that were submitted as part of the application. I've had several public records requests and trying to just push that link out to everyone because for the folks that are adjoining that property, I'm sure that's of high interest to them. So to get to some of the specifics, so for instance, you have around 15 acres of commercial neighborhood acreage. You have 8.4 acres of commercial general acreage, another 13.7 of commercial neighborhood acreage, 13 acres of residential multifamily 2, and then 26.7 acres of residential single-family acreage. So
60/40 then.
yeah. So that's kind of the breakdown of their proposed zoning districts.
And also, that map he's looking at is one of the attachments that is on our website. You can see the breakdown of that zonings that the Planning Commission will be considering.
I looked at that today.
Further questions?
One final question, then. Is it possible then that if they did request a TIF, that it could be only for part of that?
Possible, yeah, I guess possible.
All right, thank you.
Further questions on this resolution? If not, slated for 3 readings, understanding they'll be tabling throughout the process. Mr. Groff, who's your second?
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. Schoonover will second. Temporary Resolution 12819. Temporary Resolution 12919, a resolution indicating services to be provided by a municipal corporation to the annexed territory is coming through law. Mr. Groff.
This is all pertaining to the same annexation and will follow the same path through the Planning Commission. And I would ask that Mr. Hall seconds.
Mr. Hall will second 12919 with 3 readings. Moving on then to Temporary Ordinance 1819, an ordinance to change the name of Anchor Avenue to Magna Avenue, coming through Economic Development. Mr. McDaniel.
Yeah, this is a pretty straightforward request. In recognition of the investment that Magna is making in the city of Lancaster, we're requesting that Anchor Avenue be renamed Magna Avenue.
Very good. Questions on this? What's your pleasure here, Mr. McDaniel?
3 readings is fine, and Mr. Groff will be the second.
Mr. Groff will second. 3 readings on Temporary Ordinance 1819. Temporary Ordinance 1919, an ordinance to accept a petition for annexation of 76 plus or minus acres in Greenfield Township, coming through law. Mr. Groff.
Again, pertaining to the same annexation, following the same path, will be 3 readings and probably tabled because of the Planning Commission process in that. And I would ask that Mr. Schoonover second that.
Mr. Schoonover then will second 1919 with 3 readings. Temporary Ordinance 2019, amending the zoning map subject to passage of the annexation, coming through law. Mr. Groff.
Same, would ask that Mr. Hall second that.
Very good. 3 readings on Temporary Ordinance 2019 with Mr. Hall as the second. I see no other items to prepare for tonight's meeting. I'll send it back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to defer to Law Director Ullum, who's going to make an introduction and talk about NOPEC. Mr. Ullum.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Stoughton. I just wanted to talk, this is in relation to temporary ordinance 15-19 and 16-19. I talked to Chairman Stoughton earlier. We would be looking for, or asking for, a second reading and suspension of the 3rd reading tonight on both of those pieces. As you all know, we've been in the governmental electric aggregation business since 2013. And as we went through this process, again, whether to rebid and go out and continue on that path by ourselves, one of our other options was to join a council of governments, which is NOPEC, and basically pursue. These are approximately 235, 240 communities across the state of Ohio. So basically just to improve our buying power, improve getting a better rate, joining together in our electric aggregation efforts. So in that line, I handed out before the meeting started to some of the pocket guides and frequently asked questions with regard to NOPEC. We have with us here tonight Rob Barkley, who is the Member Development Director for NOPEC. And Rob and I have been working together on this transition, and I'm going to invite Rob, if you would, up to the podium. He can introduce himself and just give you a little bit on NOPEC and maybe take some questions from you if you have any. Thank you. Rob?
Thank you, Randall. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Council. Thank you for having me here this evening. As the Law Director mentioned, my name is Rob Barkley. I'm here this evening representing NOPEC, Northeast Ohio Public Energy Council. My office is in Columbus, Ohio, so I'm a quick rundown from Columbus. And NOPEC is the Law Director mentioned, is a council of governments. It is a non-for-profit organization that is now entering its 20th year of managing and supplying communities across the state, over 235 of them, with their natural gas and electric aggregation programs. Of course, here in Lancaster, you have your own gas municipal, so the only program that you can participate in through this type of organization would be your electric aggregation program. And so NOPEC is an organization that regularly solicits various suppliers to participate and supply their communities. And also, it's very important to realize that NOPEC is also a member council. So the NOPEC is driven by its members to provide programs and the type of pricing options to its communities that the communities want. And so it's been test-driven now for, as I said, nearly 20 years with many, many other communities across the state. These can be cities, villages, townships, and/or counties. And so there's all different sizes of communities that are participants in NOPEC. They currently serve over 900,000 accounts, approximately 500,000 electric accounts, and 400,000 gas accounts. So I'm really here to help you and your administration to make this a very smooth transition. Your current program runs through what we call the January meter reading date. So in order to make it a seamless transition program without any interruption in the service, not that your service would stop with AEP, but within the program, then we need to move the program to meet all of the regulatory requirements that the PUCO demands, including sending notice of the new program out to your community by the middle of November. So I've already shared a draft of that. It would be a branded letter this very first time because people haven't seen NOPEC before in your communities. So there's a letterhead with both the city of Lancaster and NOPEC on there so that there's some security and knowledge that the city is behind this. And again, I've shared that with the law director, and I know he's passed that on to members of the administration as well. So I'm here to take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Barkley? We've asked a lot of questions the last time. I mean, the obvious ones are if people want to opt out, they can opt out of the program.
Absolutely correct.
Will they pay a higher fee opting out than they will staying in?
Well, if the initial, there is no fee, obviously, if you're a utility customer of AEP Ohio's. And if you want to be in the program, there's also no fee. So the current, you can leave the NOPEC program at any time during the program. And there's also various different pricing options. So your people, I should let you know this, the people who will receive letters in November are anyone who's a current participant in your aggregation program, as well as any other additional eligible people that weren't in the current program but have come about subsequent to the last mailing that they made. So anyone who is a PIP customer, Planned Income Payment Program, which the state runs, is not eligible to be a participant, or if a resident or a small business had already made a decision on their own to just, I'm going to select my supplier, self-select, so to speak, then they would also not be eligible for the program unless they went back to the utility. So I just want to make sure that you know, when the letter comes out in November, someone is going to say, well, gee, I didn't get the letter. Why didn't I get the letter? And it would be for one of those reasons that I just described.
Let me back up and ask the question again.
Okay.
If I buy my energy directly from AEP, am I going to pay more than?
No, AEP's current price to compare for a resident is 5.2 cents, and our rate that you will see in the letter is 4.799 cents. So it's a significant savings. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I wasn't quite sure where you were going with it.
That's okay.
We just wanted to know what the advantage was.
Yeah, that's where we want to go. Yes, Mrs. Bobbitt.
Okay, I want to clarify what you said. You said that you will not, you said something about small businesses, if they had opted out, will not get a letter. How about residents? If residents have opted out before and they've now been on AEP, will they get a letter from the city?
Anyone who because this is the start of a new program,
Okay,
even if you had opted out previously and you're with AEP Ohio now, you will still get a letter. And so you will have the opportunity to opt out again or say, hey, no, this looks pretty good. I think I'll go with this.
and once this is approved, everyone will be on this new aggregation unless they opt out.
Everybody
And
who
the,
is,
everyone eligible.
correct.
Speaking like
Okay.
attorneys.
Yes,
That's just.
you are correct.
Well,
Some people, so you have 15,000 households approximately, I believe, tell me if you're in the city of Lancaster. So I don't know what the eligible list will be, I'm completely speculating, but it may be, let's say, 8,000, 9,000 people that would be eligible for this, for various reasons that I just described. And then among, let's just take a guess, if the 8,500 households that might get the letter, there will be a percentage that will just say, I'd rather not participate, for whatever reason. And so that's, and then we're going to provide all those stats to the administration as to what the level of participation was. And we'll also give them, obviously, the numbers that we actually mailed to, because we're very restricted to follow the precise regulations that the commission describes in the legislation to who we can mail to. Does that help?
well, it helps. I just wanted you, I knew the answer. I just wanted the public to hear the
Oh,
answer
I'm
from
sorry.
you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
The other thing,
Mr. Rule.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what is your typical level of participation when you see across communities?
Well, there's two places where participation is erodes, so to speak. One is initially when the opt-out letter comes to the community. I'd say probably there's about 90% participation from that mailing, especially if there's familiarity with an aggregation program and, a letter coming from us with the city of Lancaster, with the mayor's signature on it. If people are comfortable it's from the city and they see that this is a value for them, then they generally participate. The second letter that it's good, I'm glad you mentioned it, there will be a follow-up letter. If you don't opt out, then you will receive a confirmation letter approximately 3 weeks after the letters are mailed, initially mailed when you receive it, from AEP Ohio. Again, it's something that they're required to do, just confirming that you're switching to the NOPEC program. And that's to avoid any kind of slamming, so that, the utility is there to protect the individual, to make sure that they're not switching to a program that they weren't aware that they were switching to. And that's called a right to rescind your decision with the utility. So if someone said, oh, wow, I didn't know that I had signed up for that, and I'm changing my mind, or I didn't think that's what this was all about. So there is another percentage of people that are taken aback by the AEP Ohio letter, because frankly, it's a little scary. It's informing you, but it's frankly not as informative as it could be. And having led the aggregation programs for AEP Energy, AEP's affiliate, even we had from time to time a little bit of conflict with, those letters aren't really that great. But that's the second place. It's the second bite or chance that a citizen or a small business would have to say, oh, I didn't understand that I had signed up for that. I really don't want to be in it, or no, I'm fine with it, I knew about it, and then you do nothing, and then you're enrolled.
Mr. Woodard?
And I think the bottom line, council and the administration, I think, wants the general public to be aware that we look at these programs or enter into this because we feel that it will bring a savings to our customers, a significant savings. And that's the reason that we go into this, and not that we're going to make money on it. It's the idea that we're hoping to save the general public funds.
I'll go beyond that. It's not we feel it. It's actually, we are getting a cheaper rate than if you're just out there on the market.
Right.
The other thing too I wanted to add is, this doesn't change anything. AP is still, that's the one bill you get every month. This is just our current aggregation program or whatever. There's a line within your AEP bill. This will be the same thing as we transition from our current program over to the NOPEC program, same thing. AEP is who you call if you have an outage. All that stuff stays the same. This is basically just getting the delivery of that electricity to you at a cheaper rate than if you're just out there on the market.
Right. And this is just for a portion of your entire utility bill. So it's the generation portion only that it impacts. And I think if you'll let me go to just a 20-second background on this, when the commission realized that when deregulation first occurred more than 30 years ago, a lot of residents weren't participating in small businesses. So the commission wanted small businesses and residents to participate in this, and so they created purposely a vehicle, this aggregation vehicle, where local governments could create the program for their residents and small businesses, and they felt that that would make them feel more comfortable with the programs and raise the level of participation and value that these programs would provide to folks that would otherwise not benefit. So there was a purposeful reason in creating this.
All right, so, Law Director Ullman, you're asking for us to suspend on the two ordinances tonight. What you can say, residents can't opt out. If they don't opt out, they're going to save money. Clearly, the rate between AEP and NOPEC is, NOPEC has a lower rate, which is the same discussion we had 3 years ago, or whatever it was, when we went to the First Energy deal, who's now bankrupt, I think.
Yes.
Anyway, and this is a larger buying consortium than just the city. It's now 235 communities and 500,000 electric customers, correct?
Yes, and I will also add that every quarter or so, we would send out an additional mailing to those people who didn't receive the initial one, and it's for basically new movers, people who moved into the city, or maybe were with another supplier, heard about your program and thought it was a better value, fell back to the utility then, and then, say, 3 or 4 or 5 months into the program, we're now able to pick them up and put them in the program if they want to be.
Excellent, very good. Further questions? All right, Rob, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming tonight. Mr. Ullman, you good? Anything else to add to that?
I would just say we did, on October 8th, Rob and I held 2 public hearings, as we are required to by statute, with regard to the program. It's because of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio and the requirements that they have, that we're asking for suspension of the third reading so that we can keep this process moving along, so that we can transition all of the folks that are in our aggregation program over to this new program, the NOPEC program, and keep those savings coming rather than dropping them back onto the, to the open market, if you will, for a period of time. So we're seeing those transitions.
So was Crossroads big enough for the 2 public hearings? How many attendees did you have?
We actually held them, both of them here, and it was Rob and I. So we are
Could probably held them in your office, right?
We both got somewhat of a complex after this second meeting.
Well, duly noted. All right, very good, thank you. So we'll be asking for suspension, I believe, on 15 and 16 tonight. Again, it's the aggregation program. We did the same thing 3 years ago. It's cheaper for the consumer. And if they feel unsafe about it, they always have the reason or the ability to opt out. So, very good. Are there any other items for finance? Seeing none, Mr. McDaniel, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And I have seconded. We are adjourned.
The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at approximately 7:10.
2 minutes.
There is no place like Lancaster, Ohio, and Fairfield County, and like you, I am proud to call them home. As a longtime resident of Lancaster and graduate of Lancaster High School, this community is important to me, and I want to provide superior customer service, professionalism, integrity, and honesty at the Connor Insurance Agency. I am committed to supporting local programs and projects through my volunteer work and board membership with several organizations. It has been a great honor to work with all the first responders throughout Lancaster, Fairfield County, and the state of Ohio to put on Kids and Cops Day, to be a part of Shop with a Cop alongside the Lancaster Police Department and JFS, and to help Lancaster Public Education Foundation raise funds to support our local public schools and teachers. These men and women work hard to protect and support our community, and I would like to take this moment to say thank you for all they do. My goal as a business owner and insurance agent is to provide my clients with the most appropriate services and coverage for their needs at a competitive rate. As an independent agent, I have several carriers to choose from so I can customize your insurance coverage to fit your needs and desires. I strive to make sure there are no gaps in your coverage that could be harmful, and just as important, that you are not overinsured. I look forward to serving your insurance needs now and in the future. At Connor Insurance, we are here to serve you by protecting what is important to you. Please contact my office at 740-654-2848 for a full list of services and carriers, or visit my website, ConnorInsuranceAgency.com.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Almost everyone needs a car to get from point A to point B, and many families have 2 or more cars. At Carriage Company, located at 1031 North Memorial Drive in Lancaster, we specialize in hard-to-find used cars. Due to the recent success of the new car market, there is a large inventory of used cars available for resale. We can help you find exactly what you're looking for. With over 15 years at this location and 27 years experience in the business, we are the best place to go to find your next car, truck, van, or SUV. As a member of the Better Business Bureau, we are a Carfax Advantage dealer and offer great financing rates through a local area bank with warranties available on most vehicles. We know your time is valuable, so we take special pride in making sure that you get what you came for at a price that you can afford.
Come into the Carriage Company and check out our sweet deals.
Stop by today and let us help you, or visit us online at carriagecompany.com.
Sweet!
Welcome to Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this day and your many blessings. We thank you once again for the opportunity to be here to go about the work set before us. May you lead, guide, and direct us in this work. May we make decisions that are in the best interest of the citizens of this city. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Here.
Mrs. Downauer. Mr. Groff.
Here.
Mr. Hall.
Here.
Mr. McDaniel.
Here.
Mr. Schoonover.
Here.
Mr. Stoughton.
Here.
Mrs. Teener.
Here.
Mr. Woodyard.
Here.
Let the record reflect that 8 of 9 city council members are in attendance tonight. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mrs. Downauer from tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to excuse Ms. Downhour from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated September 23rd, 2019.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of city officials.
Email dated October 1st, 2019 regarding ITT meetings submitted by Mrs. Downhour. Series of emails regarding code enforcement meetings submitted by Mrs. Teener. Email dated October 6th, 2019 regarding the Southside Block Watch meeting submitted by Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There is one. Notice to the legislative authority of a new liquor license to Family Dollar Stores of Ohio LLC doing business as Family Dollar Store 26683 located at 1706 East Main Street, Unit 12, Lancaster, Ohio 43130, submitted by the Ohio Division of Liquor Control.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communications.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file communications. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. As was mentioned during our Finance Committee meeting, we do have a special presentation tonight. Mr. Lindy Jackson of the Hunter Run Conservancy Board is here with us, and I've just recently learned more about what this group does. It's vitally important to the overall operation of our city in our efforts to ensure that it does not flood. And so I'm excited to have Mr. Jackson here, and we'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, council. I retired about a year ago, and there's been several people that thought I ought to get involved in this board. And I knew a little bit about the Hunters Run Conservancy District, but not near as much as I do now. And I've been on the board since April. I'm serving as president of the board right now. There's three of us. We are appointed by a conservancy judge, which is Judge Trimmer. He's one of the guys that thought I should be on this board. I couldn't tell him no. So basically, the board was short a member, was not being very active. There's a lot of deferred maintenance, need for more funding, and a need to look to the future. These dams are over 50 years old now, and a lot of them are sedimentation control dams, which were built to collect sediment. And the history of this goes back to 1948, when there was a pretty major flood over on the west side of Lancaster. And there was a fellow by the name of Ollie Smith who ended up being a county commissioner. But he was a business owner, and he was the one main force behind getting the Hunters Run Conservancy District started. And it became a cooperative effort from folks in the city of Lancaster, the city administration, the county, soil and water district, and then what is now the Soil Conservation Service, which was the NRC, which is now the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. And it was kind of a pilot project to do this type of a conservancy district back in the day. The structures were all built in the 50s and the 60s. And there started out to be 30. There's 29. One of them was a dry dam that was decommissioned. There's 29 now. There's 9 flood retarding dams and 20 sedimentation dams. And those dams are all designed, those sedimentations are designed to collect. It was a lot of the gullies. There was a lot of sediment washing downstream back in the 50s and 60s. You know, the city used to dredge Hocking River all the time and the tributaries to keep the sediment out. Well, that was all the farmers' farm fields. So they saw the value in starting this conservancy district. And then, of course, for the city, about 50% of the drainage water is controlled in the with 50% of the city is protected by this watershed. And it's basically a V shape that kind of runs up 158, out 22, Crumley Road, and up to almost Lithopolis. And when it started out in 52, it was just the Hunter's Run. That's why it got named Hunter's Run. But it's actually now it's really the Upper Hocking. There's also a conservancy district in Athens that did a lot of work to keep Ohio University from flooding, and that's the Hocking Conservancy District. There's 57 of them were created around the state. I think there's 5 or 6 of them that's been done away with, eliminated. So of those 9 flood retarding dams, 2 of the major ones are Greenfield Dam and Rock Mill. And those are both state parks. ODNR owns all the ground, and the district is responsible for the maintenance of the dam. None of the lakes or ponds are owned by the district. They're all owned by the landowners, and we just have an easement for the pool of water where it's backs up, so we can control that easement where so nobody builds in it. We try to, and also an easement for the dam. So over the years, those properties get sold and split. So there's multiple owners of some of these structures out there. So our job is to make sure that we're following the Ohio Department of Natural Resources dam safety regulations. And there's 15 dams that are under those regulations. They're in a hazard class 1, 2, or 3, and that's based on the height of the dam, how much water it holds back, and how many structures can be damaged or downstream. So it's pretty important that we maintain these dams and keep this full infrastructure operating, because your current FEMA flood map is based on those dams doing their job. If those dams weren't there, you probably wouldn't have been able to build them all. A lot of the development all down along the river you would never have been able to have done under today's regulations if those dams weren't in place. So in addition to holding back the water under normal conditions, you certainly don't want one of them to fail and create a major flood on top of the rain events that are taking place. So that, in a nutshell, is the Hunters Run Conservancy District. And again, there's 3 of us, three board members. We're working in a volunteer basis, and we report to Judge Trimmer. And that's the way it works. It's a political subdivision. It's like a township, but there's no full-time paid management of it. And we had a couple part-time people that did some of the maintenance. One of those just quit, and so we're down to 1. But we actually, the money that Paul mentioned earlier, we were able to get all the hazard class dams mowed and cleaned up, and we're in the process of assessing those dams for minor damage from groundhogs and muskrats and things like that. And those are all inspected by the ODNR and also by the NRCS. So we got a lot of work ahead of us to get these things all in shape. Our business model is going to be doing a lot more contracting for the work and not rely so much on part-time help, because that doesn't necessarily always work. When you don't have a full-time manager out there managing what's going on, you don't necessarily get done what you want to get done. So that's in a nutshell. That's the Conservancy District. And I know you got a busy schedule tonight. Be glad to come back anytime if you want to talk some more, or I can answer some questions now if you like.
So who are your other 2 board members?
Mike Mauldin, and he is actually a semi-retired NRCS engineer. He's from Pickerington. So he's not really, a local guy here involved with the district, with the watershed area, but he's a great resource to have. And then Heather Malinowski is the other one. She happens to live right next to dam number 8 up on Mount Zion Road. So she's a Arizona gal, and she just got interested in it and decided she would volunteer. So we got a good board. We meet on the 3rd Thursdays down at the Fairfield County Government Services Building right now. being hosted by John Coaches from EMA. And when he gets his new building ready out on Baldwin Drive, we'll be moving out there.
Very good. Can you quickly summarize where your revenue is derived to do this work?
It's kind of a complicated process, but it's based on the original plan, and they identified the parcels that would actually pay a special assessment on their tax bill. There's about 2,600 parcels involved. Surprisingly, they didn't include the entire watershed. There's about 13,000 parcels in the entire watershed. So there's, the city, the county pays a portion. There's a fee. A lot of the folks over on the west side area where they're, in the inundation zones, they pay $10 a year, something like that. That's not major. Some of the other commercial establishments pay more. Schools pay a good bit more. And it's based on a percentage of the original cost of the improvements that were made. So this whole project was done for about $1.3 million. So you can assess 1% with no court action. If you go above 1%, it has to be approved through the court. And so we just went from 5% to 15%, and that's 15% of the original value. So that's going to generate about $195,000. We've been getting about 65, and that's enough to do the normal maintenance and take care of a few problems here and there, but it's still not enough. So our plan for next year is for 2020 is to have some public hearings and actually expand the district to the entire watershed, which will spread those dollars out significantly. And so that's a major project we've got to take on to get that done.
Great. Are there further questions for Mr. Jackson tonight? Yes, Ms. Bobbitt.
So, the life of a dam, you've already said, it's a lot of years, but you must have a forecast of maybe when you put in a new dam.
Well,
I mean, how many years down the road is that?
Well, some of that lifespan that we're talking about, 50 years, was when those sedimentation ponds filled up with sediment.
Okay.
And when they filled up, they're not a danger, but they're just not doing the job that they were supposed to do. So part of our future planning is to have a full engineering assessment done on all these dams. And that's involves core drilling of some of the 9 critical ones, making sure that, they're safe. And some of the changes that need to be made is increasing the emergency spillways in case they do overtop. And again, sediment removal with Rock Mill. If you go up there on Mount Zion Road, you notice that the upper end is filling in with cattails, and it's filled in with a lot of sediment over the years, but it's still got a lot of capacity. So that's a whole hydrology process there to engineer and look at that. And that's something that was never done, because nobody ever put forth the effort to try to generate the revenue that was needed to do that. It's a timely process for sure. So.
Well, I'm sure it costs more than 1.3 million.
Current day value is about 13 million for the total, for the original cost. Replacement cost would be about 13, 14 million. But so going forward, you have to kind of do an assessment of what the value of the properties that you're protecting, and that includes the roads. If you ever go down Mount Zion Road, there's 2 pretty good sized gullies out there that they actually built the dams and then put Mount Zion Road across the top of them. And then, so you got to remember that, that excessive flooding could cause you to have, larger bridges put in, or bridges wash out, replacements, things like that. So it's pretty amazing how much water can come down through that Hocking River Valley. I mean, it's a lot of water.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall.
Just real quickly, Mr. Jackson, if some of those dams aren't working to their full capacity, does that create any degree of liability for flooding on the west side that we wouldn't otherwise have if they were working at full capacity?
Well, again, most of those are the sedimentation which those are upstream of the nine flood retarding. So their basic job is to keep those 9 from filling up with sediment. They do hold back water and regulate how fast it comes in, but they're not really critical to the flood retarding process there, if you will.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, further questions from Mr. Jackson tonight? Well, thank you for being here. Some interesting information, and again, I'm just not sure folks realize just what, we have to do in order to ensure that the city isn't going to have an issue with flooding and how important this is. And so we appreciate you being here, and you provided some documentation as well.
I was going
for
to
us.
say, yes, there's a funny thing, this first document was published in 2008, and it talks about the case for reinvesting in the Upper Hocking watershed and how important it was, but yet since 2008, there hasn't been a whole lot done. There was a couple of dams refurbished back in 2004, but that's been the last major work that's been done. So we got a lot of work ahead of us to make sure that we continue to operate safely.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your work, and we'll ask the clerk maybe to scan that in and drop it on the website so that those members of the public who are interested can download the document that Mr. Jackson provided to us tonight.
You might also want to, I don't know if it's appropriate for the city to do this, but you could also put a link to our website. It's Hunters Run CD for Conservancy District, huntersruncd.org.
Okay.
So there's information out there. We're continuing to develop that. There was not one existent before we got organized in April. We've also got a Facebook page, Hunters Run. We'll get you to our Facebook page, and we post a lot of photos and some of the activities we've been involved in this summer. So
That's
try
great.
to keep everybody up to speed on what's going on.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being here tonight. Let's show Mr. Jackson our appreciation for being here. And presenting to us. Thank you. All right. Are there any petitions or memorials this evening?
There is one petition, a petition for annexation of property located on North Columbus Street, known as Timber Top, consisting of 76.877 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township, which was received on Friday, September 27th, 2019 at 7:30 a.m. from Thomas Winkart Esquire, agent for petitioner. A copy of the petition is available online or by contacting the clerk. A revised attachment A to the annexation petition of the same property was received on Monday, September 30th at 1:30 p.m., and a revised attachment A, B, and C of the same property was received on Friday, October the 11th, 2019 at 9:15 a.m.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the petition.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the petition. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. During this portion of Lancaster City Council, we set time aside to allow the residents of the city to address City Council on any item or issue you would like. If you're interested in addressing Lancaster City Council tonight, we ask that you would come forward to the podium. Sign in with your name and address, and then also state the same for the record. Please note that while members of City Council will not respond to you during this part of the meeting, they may choose to do so at a later portion of the meeting. In accordance with the rules of council, we ask that you would keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. With that being said, I think we may have had some folks sign in ahead of you. Ms. Probasco, sir, did you sign in? We'll go ahead and recognize you if you'd like to come, and then we will get Ms. Probasco right after you are finished. If you'll just state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name's Terry Andrews. I'm with Westport Homes. My address is 507 Executive Campus Drive, Westerville, Ohio. I have an item on the agenda tonight under ordinances. It's ordinance 14-19, and it's a plat for Misty Meadows Phase, or Section 4. I'm making a request to see if you could combine the second and third reading into one reading to suspend the rules. In various cities, they allow this process. I'm not sure about Lancaster, but we are meeting all the requirements for the plating and hope that you could do this tonight with the approval.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Is there anyone else who would like to address City Council? Ms. Probasco, did you sign in? Please come ahead. If you'll just state your name and address for the record.
Debbie Probasco, 850 Second Street, Lancaster. I'm here to speak for voters, members of our Brock Watch family and friends about the light at South Broad Street and Hubert Avenue. I'm speaking on behalf of almost all the new faces you see in here tonight. We now have 646 signatures between hard signatures and change.org. We're averaging 100 signatures a week. The reason for that is because people are traveling that area just to see what we're talking about. Once they drive it, they're finding out the light needs to stay. If this light was located in downtown Lancaster, you can darn well bet you would have threw the switch by now. No questions asked. We're asking for the same consideration. There are neighborhoods in this town outside of downtown, and it's time this city start paying attention to them and help the people and the voters that live in those neighborhoods. I was just informed that one of the bus stops that was stopping at 2nd and Iman has now been moved to Broad and Iman. All the people on the west side of Broad Street have to cross to the east side to load onto their school buses. There are no crosswalks from Walnut Street clear out to the BIS Hamburg Road split. That's ridiculous. We have people in wheelchairs. If you want the numbers, I'll sit here inside them. I went through and counted wheelchair ramps on both the east and west side of Broad Street. There are two gentlemen on walkers who do not drive that walk to Dollar General to get bread, milk, or whatever else they might need. They cross Broad Street. Friday morning, I watched the one gentleman sit on his walker for 9 minutes, waiting for traffic to clear enough for him to get across the street. On October the 9th, we had a block watcher meeting. The mayor and several council members were at that meeting. Basically, what we have been told is that intersection is under study. Generally, when an intersection is under study, it's posted, this intersection's under study, and you see cameras posted around the intersection. This has not been done at that intersection. People's lives are at stake. People are running the alleys. We've had 4 accidents on East Clark Street and the alley between 2nd and 3rd Street because people are avoiding the Hubert Broad Street intersection. We have people flying down the alley behind the townhouses that sit there on South Broad and Hubert, between Hubert and Reese, to avoid that intersection. The light needs to come back on. And yes, we were told it's as simple as throwing a switch. The light does not have to be recalibrated. All you have to do is throw the switch. We have Beggars Night coming up on October 31st. We're expecting depending on weather, 300 to 800 kids in that area. I have requested Lancaster Police Department be present with an officer to cross people safely across the intersection. I know that puts a burden on the police department, but it's not our fault, it's your fault. You guys took this light, put it on blinking. We now have a situation where the cars that headed north and south on Broad Street have decided they're not sure what to do there. So they're woeing up. The people at the stop sign don't get the opportunity to go because they're afraid to. When a gentleman on a bicycle, approximately 2 nights ago, police weren't called, but they should have been. He was hit by a car on a bike. Did a lot of damage to his bike. He seemed to be okay, according to the neighbors that live around in that area. I asked why the police weren't called, and no one gave me an answer, but they should have been called. This is ridiculous for you guys to drag this out for another 6 months, saying that intersection's under study. If it was downtown, Broad, and Main Street, you would have thrown the switch. People's lives are at risk. I don't care if it's going to cost you $70,000 to upgrade that intersection. Should have thought that before you threw the switch. The light is a working light. It was a working light. We need it to become another working light.
Got about 5 seconds to wrap up, Ms. Probasco.
Well, I'm sorry, but if I've gone over, but I could bring all these people up here and you could sit here for another hour or two.
We appreciate that you're not doing that. Thank you.
We have 10 people, 10 driveways on Broad Street, just in the 800 block. People are waiting 8 to 12 minutes to back out of their driveways. That's ridiculous. I've looked over your traffic study. I've asked police department to do one for us. When I do get that study, and when they do get it completed, I will get those numbers to you. But in the meantime, you really need to consider turning that light back on, writing a grant, find a way to come up with the money. Because if someone gets killed at the intersection, it's going to be on your guys' shoulders, not ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Is there anyone else who would like to address Lancaster's? Anyone else who would like to address Lancaster City Council this evening? Well, thank each of you for being here tonight. We appreciate it. Yes, Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we go outside the regular order of business to get some feedback from the administration on this particular issue. This is 2 meetings in a row. I was not able to attend the block watch meeting. I want to understand what is. Will you indulge me in that vote?
I sure will. There's a motion to go outside the regular order of business to address this issue. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Woodger, was the first one I saw. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are outside of the regular order. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'll defer to Service Safety Director and the Mayor. Can you give us, it's like Dr. Phil will tell you, no matter how thin the pancake, there's 2 sides. So we've heard from Ms. Probasco and the folks that she's brought in. Tell me what's going on down there, and what the plan is.
So, Debbie means a lot to me. I mean, we've interacted a lot. Some things that she's done with the police department have been very helpful. And you're very passionate, and I understand that. We are looking at it. It's hard to evaluate properly when you have a light functioning to say we're evaluating the traffic. Yes, we are getting a camera. I think it'd be very helpful. We've never owned one where we've been able to put a camera at a site and be mobile and really analyze the traffic and the flow of issues. I've been through this intersection multiple times myself at different times. And I understand that there are times what she is describing actually does happen. Yes, the safety of our pedestrians, we've got some ideas. The biggest thing is to do a proper evaluation of it. It could be me coming in tomorrow and say, okay, LDOT, throw the switch. Yes, I have that authority. We've not got that camera up yet to evaluate it. The times that I've been through, early in the morning to watch the traffic heading north, a steady flow, I understand that. But I will say that light can turn green and that flow will be there just as well. I think we have a pedestrian issue. That's what you're really citing more than anything is your pedestrians. Personally, I think a great solution is to get something similar to what we have on Sheridan Drive over by, it's Cherry Street, I'm sorry, Cherry Street Pub, similar places we have on 188 to do. That's something that we thought would be a great solution to see what kind of pedestrians are crossing. We do notice that they cross all over Broad Street, but to give a one section right there to cross, hit the button, the light turns yellow, traffic would stop, and we see that all throughout the city. Really solves the pedestrian problem.
Let me interrupt you here for a second. What prompted, maybe I didn't, I've got you going the wrong direction. What prompted the consideration for taking this light down? Is there a inherent problem with having the light there? Or, I mean, that's what I want to understand. Because my entire lifetime, that light has been there. So,
yes, it is an old light. It's not able to connect to our new system of lights. We have one just one block north.
Okay.
Yes, she even mentioned it. It would be $75,000 or plus to update that light to intersect. So what prompted is the fact that as we just did a preliminary no science about evaluating it, we've removed other lights in the city that are not important. I don't class this light to the level of many of the others. We just did a major change at Columbus and Broad Fair Avenue, and that was a very old light. We did an update there. But this is a very passionate group that would like to see this light stay there.
Well, no, I'm asking you.
Right, but that's what prompted it.
What data indicated that we needed to look at taking that light? That's all I'm asking. That's what I understand.
Let me address that. So the light is about to fail. It is 40 years old. It's really old technology, and to replace it, it's $70,000 or $75,000 seems like a ridiculous amount of money to put up some new lights, but it's a lot more complicated than that, because when we replace a light, we have to bring everything up to standard. So right now, it's hanging by wires on AEP poles, which can't continue. If we upgrade it, we have to put in new poles, probably mast arms. We'd have to put a lot of work into infrastructure like handicap ramps, so the whole intersection has to be brought up to current standards. So it's a lot more than just buying some new traffic lights and sticking them up on the wire. It's a lot more complicated.
That's why I asked.
Yes.
So I want to understand. Let me ask you a different question. And this is going to put you on the spot, but if money were no object, would you replace the light and upgrade the system?
Well, one of the problems is there's criteria for traffic lights, and that intersection doesn't meet the criteria for a traffic light.
Okay.
So,
Understand, there's a very passionate group of people here.
Yes.
And they're not wrong for being passionate about it, but.
So there are two sides to every traffic light. One side is the criteria to have a traffic light at an intersection. The other side is public opinion and public safety. So we're considering both, and we have committed to the citizens down there that we have to go through this process of studying the light, the pedestrian traffic, the vehicular traffic. Suggestions have been made, like a four-way stop, but you got 85% of the traffic is on Broad Street, 15% is on Hubert Street. So if you have a four-way stop, if cars actually stop, traffic would be backed up on Broad Street long distances, which wouldn't enable people to get out of their driveways. There is the possible solution that Paul mentioned about a light like at Cherry Street Pub. There are several others around the city at bike trail crossings, which may be a solution, but we have to evaluate all the solutions and make an informed decision about what we need to do there.
Very good. Thank you. I'll defer to others.
Thank you, Mr. Stoughton. Yes, Ms. Teener.
I have a couple things. So, I know you, but, and maybe I missed this in this, but can it be flipped back on until you get the camera and that up? Why not have it up until the study starts?
I would have to ask Tim back there. I would say yes, but to properly evaluate what you're saying, we're looking to very soon to get this camera to observe that intersection as it is, because you're not really going to reflect what it's currently going through. And I understand, I think beggar nights is a big issue. I've got the school district weighing in with us on where the bus stops are, alteration of some of that. Because you can be on both sides of Broad Street, wait till the bus appears, and then every traffic stops and they cross over there. But is that what the bus does? I don't know.
Do you think it'll be turned on at least for Beggar's Night or not? Because that's just a request.
That's a major issue.
I think it either turned on or looking at having a police officer there.
An off-duty officer, I will pay with my own money to have an officer there for Halloween. I will do it with my own money. It won't be out of the city's budget.
For sure, but
I will do it.
Thank you.
Because this is ridiculous.
Ma'am, I see you approaching there, and unfortunately, there's just no opportunity outside of the voter and taxpayer time for the residents to address City Council. I'm sorry. Yes, I see Mr. Dietz wanting to approach as a member of the city staff, please.
Yes, to follow up with what Paul's saying, we could just flip the switch on. The issue we have is the current condition of the operation of that signal. There is no way for the pedestrian to actuate the movement for east and west across Broad Street. There are no pedestrian signals, there are no pedestrian buttons. If kids want to cross, people want to cross, they've got to wait for a vehicle to pull up to a loop. So to turn on for Beggar's Night for pedestrians, unless there's a lot of vehicular traffic in the area to actuate the signal, there's no way for the pedestrians to do that. So to turn on for Beggars Night is, for the people, it just doesn't make sense.
So if I understand what you're saying, the light doesn't turn red on Broad Street unless a car trips the detector on Hubert. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right.
So I am willing to commit a police officer at that time, okay? And that's something that I didn't specifically talk to our chief today, but willing to do that. And as we look at it, pedestrian safety is probably the biggest thing that I hear, and I think that has to be addressed. And so, you know.
If you get an off-duty officer, I mean, you know.
Well, on
somebody-
Beggars Night, I don't have a problem with Halloween trick or treat. That sounds good.
Okay, but.
Yes, I think that'd be a great thing, and we'll make that commitment. I don't see any problems with that. I'm telling you, people are crossing all over Broad Street. Okay, so all I'm saying is, we'll put a cross there, no matter what's gonna happen, we're gonna do something for pedestrians better at that intersection, as we have talked about some things. But I'm just saying, throughout the entire city, we have people crossing elsewhere in the block, and that's observations from our police officers that I've gotten instructions from, but we'll see what we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I saw Mr. Hall had
Yeah,
his hand up.
just real quickly, before Councilman Teener stepped in, I was going to also suggest that we consider turning the light back on. And one of the things that strikes me, if 85% of the traffic is coming from one direction, it does seem that if the light is operational, that it still might provide some degree of protection for pedestrians crossing that sign, or at that location. So that's just one thought. The other thought is, I think that we probably need to make sure that we expedite the review so that we can provide some degree of assurance about what the strategy is moving forward as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah, I appreciate that suggestion, Mr. Hall. Mr. Dietz, can you at all talk about the process of timeline as you're moving through here?
Sure. To kind of answer Tom's question, the reason we started looking at the light is in 2017, we started running fiber optic cable to every traffic cabinet in the city with the intention of upgrading the whole traffic control system. At this point, we are at about 90% capacity now with the new system. There are 3 legs of the city to get on the system yet with the fiber optic cable. South Broad Street is one of those 3. So as we're sitting down with Greg, as we're looking at what we need to do to get each one of those, there's 3 signals on South Broad Street, at Reese, at Hubert, and at Mount Ida. To get those signals on the cabinet, we have to have the fiber optic communications equipment for each cabinet. We have to get the cable to each cabinet, and at this particular time, the cabinet at Hubert and Broad cannot handle as far as room goes. There's no room to put the new equipment in the cabinet, so something's gonna have to be done there anyway if we do wind up keeping it. So the process was, with the money we need to find to upgrade the system down that stretch of roadway, do we really want to spend the money on a signal that isn't warranted to be there per the standards set forth by the federal government? And part of that study, there's 9 different warrants that are looked at. There's 8-hour volumes, there's 4-hour traffic volumes, there's pedestrian volumes, there's crash history that's looked at, there's what they call a gap study that needs to be done, and the gap study itself can't be done on an operating signal because the signal is designed to create a gap in the main street traffic. So we decided in the safety committee that we would place the intersection in the 2-way stop situation, which would be stop on Hubert, free flow on Broad Street. That gets us to the point where if this signal weren't there, that's how this intersection would operate. The warrant study would then proceed to be done on an intersection that would be a 2-way stop to see if this intersection would actually warrant signalization because of traffic volumes, pedestrian volumes, crash history, and whatnot. So at this point, we are in a situation where we can truly evaluate it as though it were a two-way stop. So, moving forward, if we were to want to keep this signal, we're gonna have to spend some money to upgrade it. And I'm not opposed to spending money to upgrade the system, as long as it does warrant being there. The conditions right now is not meeting the warrants, but everything I've gathered from all the input is that the biggest concern is about pedestrians. And at this time, the signal itself can't handle the pedestrian movements because there's nothing there for them now. We could upgrade them, but if we're gonna upgrade, we might as well spend the money to upgrade the whole thing. However, and I agree with that, however, if it is strictly pedestrian driven, there are other means that Paul mentioned as far as being able to place what they call rapid rectangular flashing beacons like you see in front of Cherry Street Pub that will assist the pedestrians in getting across the street. If we were to do that, the signalization part of it is one aspect. The other part of it is the roadway aspect as far as crosswalk installation, and once I place a crosswalk indicating to a pedestrian where they need to cross, it has to be ADA acceptable or accessible. Right now, it's not. There are no crossings on Broad Street to get across Broad Street from east to west, anywhere down through there.
So again, can you summarize a timeline?
The timeline is technically we should observe this for at least a year because there's a 12 month crash history that needs to be pulled to see if there are crashes that are occurring and what kind of a crash is occurring. One of the warrants that is studied will be evaluated to see if the installation of a signal would reduce or eliminate that type of crash. So that type of crash here would be basically like a T-bone. Somebody pulls out in front of somebody, they get T-boned. Obviously, a signal could help eliminate that because you're assigning right of way to a driver. Going back with that, sometimes when the signal's installed, another type of crash starts to develop, particularly rear-end crashes. When we did a preliminary study back in May for this, in the last 12 months, there were 3 crashes that were actually rear-end crashes that were caused by somebody stopped at a red light on Broad Street, and the person behind them wasn't paying attention, and they got rear-ended. So if we look at that aspect of it, that crash probably would never have occurred if the signal wasn't there. So what we wanted to do moving forward, and to address your timeline, we've got a camera we're getting ready to install so we can monitor the situation, we can monitor the ped movements, we can count the people. We're also going to set out our radar counters to count not only vehicles, but it will also do the gap study that's required. It will also do the speed study that's required. It's not required, but part of it, which is what PD would do with their trailer.
So the $75,000 you're talking about, is that just for the signals? Does that include complete upgrade of the intersection?
That would be, the 75 to 150 is depending on how extensive we get with the upgrade. As Paul mentioned, we've got one pole that's owned by the city. The other, it's a diagonal span. The other support pole is owned by AEP. We're trying, as a city, trying to get off of other infrastructure owned by other entities in case they make a change, and we've got to move. Those poles for AEP probably will never go anywhere, but when we upgrade an intersection, which is what you just saw we did at Fair and Columbus, we're installing our own poles. We're trying to get everything up to speed. If we do upgrade it, we are required to upgrade the signals from an 8-inch signal head to a 12-inch signal head. So the $75,000 basically will be the equipment, the cabinet, the underground wiring, or overhead wiring, any support apparatus we need, pedestrian signals, pedestrian activation buttons, the whole 9 yards.
ADA compliant ramps on then and off then?
Excuse me?
The ADA compliant on and off, all
That
that's a
would
part of it?
probably, that's, talking to Greg, that would probably include all of that.
Okay.
Which if we put in pedestrian movements, obviously we put in the crosswalks and
Right.
we've got to make them, the whole thing would be,
Okay.
every corner would have an ADA ramp.
Very good. Further questions? Mr. Woodger?
Well, I think one of the main issues, though, is Broad Street does not have any crosswalks anywhere. So we need to address that issue before a year. That, I think, is important.
And I don't
Secondly,
disagree.
it seems that we are putting the city in a situation of extreme liability because we're basically taking that light and moving it to a blinking light in order to decide whether or not there's going to be any head-on collisions. That kind of bothers me too. And so, I think we need to expedite the system as much as possible and move around any of those qualifications that we are allowed to. I know we have to meet a certain amount of them, but a year is too much to ask these people to wait for something to be done in that intersection.
Well, the study is still going on. The study it hasn't been completed yet, so we are still in the midst of collecting data to base our decisions on.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Woodger. I saw Ms. Bobbitt, were you gonna?
You really did see my hand up?
I did. I'm.
I mean, it was up a long time ago.
Oh,
But I think I got all of my questions answered except for, a full-blown, light there is 75,000. And maybe you know this, maybe you don't know that, but what would be the cost of just the PED sign like we have at Cherry Street?
Cherry Street Pub, the signs, the lights, the solar panel that operates the lights, all that apparatus, plus the pole, plus the concrete that supports the pole, the buttons, the whole 9 yards, they run about anywhere from $3,000 to $3,500 a piece. So you're looking at $6,000 to $7,000 to upgrade just that portion of it. Then as far as the handicap ramps go, they're like $1,200 a piece, something like that, roughly, for installation. The pavement markings pretty much are a wash at this point. It's just latex.
So
paint.
less than 10,000.
Yes.
The advantage with that light is that it can be activated at any time. And it's been very effective a lot of places, so the pedestrians is really a true concern, so. And we're not about to take a year, just to let you know, but that's what we do a lot of other intersections. People are just not aware about it when we do an evaluation of it. I want real numbers, and that's what we were trying to look for. So we're not gonna take a year.
Like we discussed in our Public Works meeting, the data collection process is our way of we're trying to take the emotion out of the whole thing. The hard data will tell us what's out there versus what's being perceived as being out there. Everywhere we've done a study to do something, the first reaction is somebody's going to die. And it's just simply has never been the case. And I understand that the people in the area, I understand that they see things every day that I don't see, that most of us don't see, and I appreciate their input, and their input is very valuable. And it's all considered when we do make our decisions. But the data collection process is just part of what we have to do to validate what we do.
Thank you.
Just
Ms.
a
Bob?
follow-up,
Sure.
but as we talked about in Public Works, and as you said tonight, if it cannot be turned back on, if we can have a police officer there, that would probably make every one of us around the table feel better.
Well, I
Need
think
that
we've already had
commitment.
that commitment, so.
Yes.
We're gonna have that commitment for trick or treat night, yes. Mr. McDaniel?
Yeah, I appreciate and understand all the things you have to do, Tim, to validate the need for a light and stop signs, et cetera, and I understand the state puts these guidelines out, but Broad Street is, I think, busier than some of the areas we've removed some of the lights. And I also think, we removed the light at Cleveland how many years ago? 10, 15 years ago?
Something like that.
Something like that?
Within the last 10.
I grew up in that area. My mother still lives down there. I think there's a lot more pedestrian traffic than some of us may realize. I think Halloween, having an officer there is great, but probably as easy as flipping a switch and saving the officer and having him patrol the city. Honestly, that's my opinion.
All right, thank you,
And
Mr.
I want to finish up with, I'd love to see the light stay there till it dies. You know, that would be my personal opinion.
Thank you, Mr. McDaniel. Is there anyone else who would like to address this evening?
I just have one follow-up.
Okay, Mr. Stone?
Thank you. Tim, thank you for all the information, and I agree with you, you know, the data is where you start, and it's an emotional time because, you know, change is imminent, and I've been in IT all my life, and change is never, when you change things, it's never well received. My other questions here are, you said there's 3 lights on Broad Street. Are all 3 of them warranted? The other 2, for that matter, I guess is my question?
Till we do a study, I don't know. I will say that the geometrics of Mount Ida, due to the curve on the inbound side, is an engineering judgment call that would probably, if it didn't meet warrants, I would keep it just because of the geometrics. The one at Reese, being the fact that Memorial Drive used to be Route 33 through town, and South Broad Street used to be 793, State Route 793, because it went to the prison down south. That's been since abandoned by the state of Ohio, which is probably the only reason that light was ever put there. But from a practical standpoint, that signal itself, the controller pole has got 3 down guys on it now because it's leaning.
Well, no,
That
again, I'm
intersection
asking,
needs it,
I'm
but
just
what I'm
really.
saying is yes, they all should be evaluated.
Okay. Well, let me-
This one in particular was chosen because several years ago it did meet warrants, and we just wanted to relight it.
And so, in the event that they wouldn't be warranted, maybe 1 or 2 of them, I mean, I do agree, we have to have places on Broad Street where people can cross and cross safely. And I will tell you, the Cherry Street light that you referenced, also there's one at Franklin Avenue by the Lanrico Park. I tell you, and Fair Avenue, those are the ones I most commonly, they are well managed by drivers. I mean, when
Yes.
drivers see those lights come on, they do stop.
Yes.
I have never seen anybody blow through it, and those are the streets that I typically drive, and I will tell you that if
The
we
Federal
take the
Highway Administration did a study on that particular pattern of flash, and they found that there's an 85% adherence to that when it comes to yielding to pedestrians that are in a crosswalk.
Yeah, and I would tell folks, and Debbie, I know that you're very active in what you do. Go spend some time, and maybe kind of in an evening time, and you know, when there's a good dinner rush going on there, and take a look at the compliance of that, because I was amazed at how people do adhere to that. So again, as potentially the alternative, I just wanted to kind of let you know that I've seen that to be a very positive outcome. And thank you, Mr. President, I'm done.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Mr. Dietz, for being here. If you
And
want to wrap
real
up.
quick, if I could touch on one thing.
Sure.
It's been discussed to be a 4-way stop. There's 2 reasons it's not being considered for a 4-way stop. Is generally speaking, a 4-way stop is designed for intersections that have approximately the same volume of traffic on both approaches, and the road use itself is generally the same. Obviously, South Broad Street and Hubert Avenue, the 2 road uses are not the same, and the volume disparity doesn't warrant that, plus the fact that we do have the turn lanes on South Broad Street, and that always adds a confusion factor of two vehicles approach on the same leg, one in the left turn lane, one in the through lane, and one on the side street. Who's going to stop, who's not going to stop, who's going to go, which is why it's not a 4-way stop.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Dietz. Did I see your hand? Okay. Well, I appreciate your being here and taking us through the work that's being done. I appreciate the administration's explanation. And I appreciate each one of you being here tonight. You are passionate about this, and I understand I had mentioned during the last meeting, those are my old stomping grounds. I grew up on Hubert Avenue. My parents still live there. And on trick-or-treat night, my brother and I perfected getting all the way up and down Hubert and all the way up and down Reese in an hour and a half. Those were my younger days, Mr. Stoughton.
And you didn't have the
I'm not
traffic.
buying
you have
any of
now.
that.
No, it happened. We were hauling to make that haul, let me tell you. We made it happen. So I appreciate you being here, and certainly I think we understand the concern, and we'll continue to work with the administration as they work through this study. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dietz, for being here as well. Thank you.
I'll return.
All right, Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for indulging me on that request. I'd like to make a motion that council go back to the regular order of business, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to return to the regular order of business. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are back in the regular order. Are there reports of standing committees?
1, Finance Committee meeting minutes for October 14, 2019, submitted by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the reports of standing committees. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there reports of special committees?
There are none to be presented.
We have no public hearings scheduled for tonight, so we'll move to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the third reading of temporary resolution 106-19.
A resolution to amend appropriation budgets and amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor and the General Fund 101 and VAWA Fund 225, offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass and engross and enter upon the written record resolution temporary 106-19.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 106-19. Discussion, Mr. Stoughton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This legislation basically just modifies the funding for the VAWA-funded position because the employee in that position changed, which required a changing of the funding mechanism. So it's just really a realignment of VAWA dollars to city dollars.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Witcher?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 106-19 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 110-19.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into contracts for mowing and other landscape maintenance services for the city cemeteries, offered by Mr. Schoonover, second by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 110-19.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and engross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 110-19. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah, this is a yearly piece for the cemetery department to go out for bid for the mowing contracts for the city cemeteries. And with a little bit of change, we're hopeful that we'll get some more competitive bidding with the split of Forest Rose into two different contracts instead of one.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Witcher?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 110-19 passes 8-0. We now have second reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 113-19.
A resolution authorizing the law director to negotiate and enter into a contract with the city of Pickerington for prosecution of cases arising from criminal and other offenses that occur in the city of Reynoldsburg within Fairfield County, Ohio, and to accept payment. Offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mrs. Downauer.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 113-19. Temporary resolution 114-19.
A resolution authorizing the law director to negotiate and enter into a contract with the city of Reynoldsburg for prosecution of cases arising from criminal and other offenses that occur in the city of Reynoldsburg within Fairfield County, Ohio, and to accept payment. Offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. The second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 114-19. Temporary resolution 115-19.
A resolution authorizing the law director to negotiate and enter into a contract with the Fairfield County Commissioners for prosecution of cases arising from criminal and other offenses that occur in the unincorporated areas and villages within Fairfield County, Ohio, and to accept payment. Offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mrs. Downauer.
Mr. Stoughton.
Second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 115-19. Temporary resolution 117-19.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the Fairfield County General Health District for public health services. Offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mrs. Downauer.
Mr. Stoughton.
Second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 117-19. Temporary resolution 118-19.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with CMI for software for the Income Tax Department and to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the Income Tax Fund 216 and amend the certificate of appropriations with the county auditor. Offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of Resolution Temporary 11819.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 118-19.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'm asking for suspension because we want to get moving on this project. This is going to upgrade the tax department software through the CMI application, which will give us much, much better and more detailed reporting on our city tax collections et al., if you will. So we're asking for suspension so we can move forward with the project.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Witchard?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Resolution Temporary 11819.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 118-19. Discussion, Mr. Stoughton.
No, thank you.
Further, any discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Witchard?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 118-19 passes 8-0. Temporary resolution 119-19.
A resolution scheduling Lancaster City Council meetings for 2020, offered by Mr. Groff, second by Mr. Hall.
Mr. Groff.
This is the second of three readings.
Second reading on temporary resolution 119-19. Temporary resolution 120-19.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an amendment to the engineering agreement for the 5th, 6th Forest Rose project design, offered by Mr. Witchard, second by Mr. Hall.
Mr. Woodard.
Second of three readings, please.
Second reading on temporary resolution 120-19. Temporary resolution 121-19.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the Union Mulberry Phase 3 Storm Sewer Project, offered by Mr. Witchard, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Woodard.
Second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 121-19. Temporary resolution 123-19.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the Parks Fund 212 and amend the certificate of appropriations with county auditor, offered by Mrs. Bobbitt, second by Mr. Witchard.
Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Second of three readings, please.
Second reading on temporary resolution 123-19. Temporary resolution 124-19.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to negotiate and enter into an agreement with the Ohio Attorney General's Office for the collection of past due tax dollars and non-filed delinquency issues, offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Second of three readings, please.
Second of three readings on temporary resolution 124-19. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions beginning with temporary resolution 125-19.
A resolution to increase receipts appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the Water Replacement and Improvement Fund 625 and the Water Revenue Fund 603, offered by Mr. Witchard, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Woodard.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its second and third readings of temporary resolution 12519.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 125-19. Discussion, Mr. Woodard.
Yes, I think Mr. Nixon's still here. You want to go over this again for the public?
Mr. Nixon.
Mr. President, members of council, this appropriation will allow us to do some needed water well work. These particular wells happen to be at the north plant. We did a little more work than we anticipated from a budget standpoint. So this will allow us to get through the end of the year and get those two wells cleaned and most likely new pumps put in them. So I appreciate your consideration for suspension.
And again, we need to suspend because we need to get on this before the end of the year while the weather's still decent, so.
Very good. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Nixon. Thank you, Mr. Woodard. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Witchard?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Woodard.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 12519.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 125-19. Further discussion, Mr. Woodard.
No further.
Discussion around the table. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 125-19 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 126-19.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the General Fund 101 and amend the certificate with the county auditor, offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of Resolution Temporary 126-19.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 126-19. Discussion, Mr. Stoughton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We're asking for suspension because we have two employees that went from no insurance to full family insurance during the course of the year in the clerk's office. They're going to go negative, which is going to irritate the auditor. Therefore, we need to appropriate this money to fund that line item for the remainder of the year.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion not to irritate the auditor. Poor Trick, she's getting beat up. All right, on the motion to suspend then, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Woodard. Oh, sorry, Mr. Stoughton. Jerry, he was on a roll over there.
Well,
so-
let him go.
No, Mr. Stoughton.
All right. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record, Resolution Temporary 126-19, please.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record Temporary Resolution 126-19. Further discussion, Mr. Stoughton.
No, thank you.
Other discussion around the table. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 126-19 passes 8-0. Temporary Resolution 127-19.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund 834, complete a fund transfer, increase receipts and appropriations in the Cemetery Fund 207, and amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor, offered by Mr. Schoonover, second by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Mr. Schoonover.
First of three readings, please.
First reading on Temporary Resolution 127-19. Temporary Resolution 128-19.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a pre-annexation agreement covering 76.877 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township, offered by Mr. Groff, second by Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. Groff.
Yes, Mr. President, this resolution involves the annexation of a property formerly known as Timber Top, which we discussed before. It will need to go through the Planning Commission also, and we will require public hearings. So this is the first of three readings.
First of three readings then on Temporary Resolution 128-19. Temporary Resolution 129-19.
A resolution indicating services to be provided by the municipal corporation to annex territory of the Mithoff Companies Ltd., annexation of 76.877 plus minus acres from Greenfield Township, offered by Mr. Groff, second by Mr. Hall.
Mr. Groff.
This is in regard to the same annexation, first of three readings.
First of three readings then on Temporary Resolution 129-19. Temporary Resolution 130-19.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance, amend the certificate with the county auditor in the Water Replacement and Improvement Fund 625 and Water Utility Reserve Fund 627, dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract and authorize the issuance of a then and now certificate, offered by Mr. Woodard, second by Mr. Hall.
Mr. Woodard, thank you.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend and waive its second and third readings, Temporary Resolution 130-19.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. We have the second and third reading of Temporary Resolution 130-19. Mr. Woodard.
Mr. Nixon, one last time.
Mr. Nixon.
Mr. President, members of council, my pun about the cool ice picking didn't go well in the earlier meeting, so I probably will bomb again this time. This is for ice pigging some roughly 3,500 feet of the water transmission main coming from the well field into the south water plant. This is a proprietary product. We have tried to do some in-house things and we're not successful. So again, I appreciate your consideration for suspension tonight, as the contractor, being the only game in town all over the country, will not put us on the schedule until we have a purchase order signed. So the sooner I can get that done this week, if possible, then we can get a hold of Suez and start this process and hopefully get it done before the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon.
Thank you.
Mr. Woodard.
Mr. Nixon does a very good job of trying to make sure that we get 2, if not 3 readings on everything, but some things in his department do require immediate attention, and this is one of those.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 8-0. Mr. Woodard.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 130-19.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 130-19. Mr. Woodard.
No further comment.
Other discussion around the table. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 130-19 passes 8-0. Are there any further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to the reading of ordinances, beginning with the second reading of temporary ordinance 14-19.
An ordinance to accept the final plat for Misty Meadows, Section 4, offered by Mrs. Teener, second by Mr. Groff.
I'll just note quickly, this is the resolution where the gentleman during public comment asked for suspension. We'll turn it over to Ms. Teener.
Yes, Madam President, oh, Mr.
Wow, thanks
President.
for the upgrade. That's all right.
I wouldn't know, I don't know. I'm just, Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Teener.
I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 1419.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 14-19. Ms. Teener.
Mr., oh, poor man, he's still here.
He is still here, yes.
I thought you'd left.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're just gonna need you to do the best you can to address.
Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and pass it, and then we'll discuss it then.
Okay, further discussion then on the motion to suspend.
I would just have a question of administration. I mean, he came to the podium and he said that he's good with everything. Are you good with everything?
Yeah, we're good with, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Planning Commission already approved this, so, yeah, so it's just come here for formal approval.
So you have no
No.
problem with suspension? Okay. Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Bobbitt, for bringing that up. Further discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Ms. Teener.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 1419.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 14-19. Ms. Teener, further
Yes,
discussion?
as Mr. Andrews had discussed earlier, it's Misty Meadows, it's out West Fair, and they're just developing more of the plat of Section 4. And they want to continue building, so they would like to have it suspended tonight and pass.
Very good. Okay, we're on the motion to pass. Further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodard?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 14-19 passes 8-0. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for being here. Appreciate that. Temporary ordinance 15-19.
An ordinance authorizing the City of Lancaster to enter into the Northeastern Ohio Public Energy Council, NOPEC, by execution and delivery of the agreement establishing NOPEC and approving the bylaws of NOPEC and declaring an emergency, offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporary 1519.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 15-19. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. We heard today from, during finance, from Mr. Barkley from NOPEC, which is the Northeast Ohio Public Energy Council, and they basically buy electrical power aggregation through the buying power of 500,000 utility customers, which is a larger group than the city of Lancaster was in 3 years ago with the First Energy, which would have been, at that point, maybe 15 to 18,000 maximum. So we get an awful lot of buying power for joining this particular NOPEC council. This particular piece of legislation allows us to join. The next piece will allow us to be a part of the aggregation. In any event, you're going to save money by being a part of NOPEC as opposed to not being a part of NOPEC. So we'd like to pass on those better rates to our city electrical consumers.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodyard?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Stoughton?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporary 1519.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 15-19. Further discussion, Mr. Stoughton?
No, thank you.
Other discussion around the table on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodyard?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 15-19 passes 8-0. Temporary ordinance 16-19.
An ordinance approving the plan of operation and governance for the NOPEC Northeastern Ohio Public Energy Council Electric Aggregation Program for the purpose of jointly establishing and implementing an electric aggregation program and declaring an emergency, offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Stoughton?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporary 1619.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 1619. Mr. Stoughton?
Thank you, Mr. President. The last piece allowed us to join NOPEC. This allows us to take part in the aggregation program.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to suspend? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodyard?
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 8-0. Mr. Stoughton?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporary 1619.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 16-19. Further discussion, Mr. Stoughton?
No, thank you.
Other discussion around the table? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mr. Groff?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mr. Woodyard?
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 16-19 passes 8-0. We now have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary ordinance 17-19.
An ordinance to amend ordinance 26-18, repeal and replace existing 26-18, and declare an emergency for the management pay ordinance, offered by Mr. Stoughton, second by Mrs. Downhour.
Mr. Stoughton?
Thank you, Mr. President. This resolution allows us, the city, to plan for a retirement in the Community Development Block Grant Program, and allow us to hire a replacement who can be trained over the course of the last couple months of the year. This is the first of three readings.
Thank you very much. First of three readings on temporary ordinance 17-19, temporary ordinance 18-19.
An ordinance to change the name of the street known as Anchor Avenue to Magna Avenue in the Rock Mill Corporate Park, Phase 2, offered by Mr. McDaniel, second by Mr. Groff.
Mr. McDaniel?
First of three readings.
First reading then on temporary ordinance 18-19, temporary ordinance 19-19.
An ordinance to accept the petition for the annexation of 76.877 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Groff, second by Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. Groff?
This is in regard to the same annexation as Resolution 128 and 129. This will be the first of three readings.
First reading on temporary ordinance 19-19, temporary ordinance 20-19.
An ordinance amending the zoning map subject to passage of the annexation of 76.877 plus minus acres in Greenfield Township and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Groff, second by Mr. Hall.
Mr. Groff?
Again, in relation to the same annexation which we've discussed in the resolutions in the previous ordinance. This will be the first of three readings.
First reading on temporary ordinance 20-19. Are there any further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Temporary ordinance 11-19 remains tabled and will do so until after the November election. Is there any unfinished business this evening? Is there any new business this evening? I would like to just mention two things briefly. First, thank you for a great meeting. We had a good finance meeting, great discussion there, and in the regular meeting. I appreciate each of you and your continued commitment to Lancaster and to doing what is in the best interest of its residents. So I appreciate your great participation tonight. Secondly, I'll just note, and the clerk may read it here in a moment, that we have scheduled the swearing-in ceremony. So for those who are successful during the November election, we wanted to get this on both your calendar as well as on Olivedale's schedule, because it seems to book up relatively quickly during the holidays. And this is something that has in the past traditionally been hosted by the President of Council. And so we have scheduled it. We invite you to come. Of course, you are free to be sworn in by anyone you want at any time you want before the first of the year. But when we come together like this, it tends to be a meaningful time where we all get sworn in together one by one by a judge or whomever we ask to come that evening, and have opportunity for pictures and for our families to be together and some light refreshment afterwards. So we hope that you will join us on December 30th for that at 6 p.m. at Olivedale. Is there any other new business this evening? If not, we'll ask that the clerk read our scheduled meetings.
Since we have 4 meetings through the end of the year, I'm going to go ahead and read all of those. October 28th, November 4th, November 25th, and December 16th. All meetings 6:30 p.m. here in council chambers. As the president stated, the oath of office is going to be Monday, December 30th at 6 p.m. at Olivedale Senior Citizen Center. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Water Pollution Control, October 16th at 7 a.m. at the Water Pollution Control Conference Room. Finance Committee, October 28th here at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Finance, November 4th at 6 p.m. here in council chambers. Service, November 8th at 7:30 a.m. at the Gas Department Conference Room. Safety, November 13th at 7:30 a.m. at the City Hall 1897 room. And finally, Economic Development, November 14th, 7:30 a.m. at the City Hall 1897 room.
Thank you very much. Are there any bills this evening?
There is one, PNC to payable to MNCO for the publication of a public hearing, $291.40.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pay the bills.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pay the bills. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Is there need for an executive session this evening? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Everyone hop on it. A motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Please remember to sign your legislation. Have a great week.